I'm Morgan, 31, female. I live in a quiet apartment on the edge of Portland. It's small. Before I could with plants I keep alive mostly to prove to myself I can still care about something that doesn't leave. I work as a marketing manager for a tech startup. My days are full of numbers, clients, and scheduled smiles. I live alone, but I used to drive home every Thanksgiving to my family's house in Vermont. It used to be my favorite time of year. Used to. This year, I was chopping vegetables for the cranberry glaze when my phone buzzed with a new message. One that changed everything. It was an email from my dad, Charles Reed. The subject line was simple. We've agreed you're no longer part of the family. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some twisted attempt at humor. My dad wasn't sentimental, but he wasn't cruel either. Or so I thought. The words blurred as I read, "Your choices have hurt this family enough. Daniel and I have decided it's best if you don't come this year. Or ever again." I stared at the screen, a slice of apple still in my hand, and for a long time, I couldn't breathe. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and orange zest. I'd been preparing for a Thanksgiving that suddenly no longer existed. My mother, Evelyn, didn't call. She never did when things got tense. She would hide behind her silence, convincing herself that not choosing a side was noble. My brother, Daniel, had always been the favorite. When I was 9, Dad gave him a baseball glove and told him he'd carry the Reed name forward. He gave me a set of coloring pencils and said, "Maybe you'll make something pretty out of it." That small difference planted something dark inside me. A feeling that never really died. I called my mom anyway. I whispered when she picked up, my voice breaking. "Did you know about Dad's email?" Her pause was enough to tell me she did. "Morgan," she said softly, "maybe it's best if you give things some time. Your father's upset about what happened last year." "What happened last year?" I said, almost shouting. "You mean when I called Daniel out for selling Dad's property behind his back?" "I was trying to protect him." "Your brother was only trying to help," she replied. "Let's not do this right now." Her voice trembled, but she didn't defend me. She never did. That night, I couldn't eat. The cranberry glaze sat untouched. The email stayed open on my laptop as if daring me to reread it. I scrolled through old photos. Dad smiling at the head of the table, Daniel carving the turkey, Mom fussing over the gravy. I used to believe we were happy. Maybe I just wanted to believe. The next day, my best friend Olivia Parker showed up at my door with coffee and a bag of muffins. She knew something was wrong before I even said a word. "What happened?" she asked. I handed her the phone. She read the email, then looked up at me stunned. "Morgan, this is insane. He actually wrote this." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't even know what I did wrong anymore." She sighed, her voice calm but firm. "You did nothing wrong. You were the only one honest enough to stand up to them." But honesty, I realized, rarely wins in families built on silence. Later that evening, I sat by my window, watching rain streak across the glass. A part of me wanted to delete the email and move on. Pretend it didn't matter. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a Thanksgiving dinner. This was about control, about years of being dismissed and made to feel small. When I was 25, I turned down Daniel's offer to join his real estate company. Dad called it a mistake. When I got promoted at my firm, he barely acknowledged it. Every success of mine seemed to threaten him. Or maybe it threatened the idea of the family he built around Danielle's achievements. Now, this email was his final judgment. I printed it out. I don't even know why. Maybe to make it real, to hold the betrayal in my hands. The paper shook between my fingers as I whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving." I didn't know then that the letter was only the beginning. That hidden beneath its cold words were secrets that would unravel everything I believed about my family. There were reasons my father wanted me gone. Reasons he didn't want me to see what Daniel had done, or what he himself had done. But for now, all I could do was stare at that letter and wonder how love could turn into exile overnight. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Before it had been 3 days since the email, I hadn't replied. I hadn't even tried to call my father again. The silence between us had turned into a living thing, sitting heavy in my apartment, breathing down my neck. I thought ignoring it might make it fade. But betrayal doesn't fade. It roots itself in your chest, grows vines, and squeezes every time you try to breathe normally. On the 4th morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, a courier stood there, holding a large brown envelope. "Delivery for Morgan Reed," he said. My stomach twisted as I took it. The sender's name printed neatly at the top. PRLs read ESQ. I signed for it, my hands trembling, and closed the door slowly. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope lying on my kitchen counter. I didn't need to open it to know this wasn't going to be good. My father never sent letters. He folded when he needed something and commanded when he wanted control. A letter meant something official, something final. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a typed document, 5 pages long, with my father's neat signature at the bottom. It wasn't just a letter. It was a legal declaration. The letter stated that my father was removing me from his will. He'd rewritten it 2 weeks earlier, naming Daniel Reed as the sole inheritor of all family assets. The Vermont home, the savings, even the land that had belonged to my grandparents. And the reason? Irreconcilable personal and moral differences. My chest tightened. Moral differences. I read the words again and again. I had done nothing immoral. Nothing that deserved this kind of exile. I'd only confronted Daniel for secretly transferring our father's property into his company's name. Dad had called it helping with business logistics. I had called it what it was, theft, and now I was being erased for speaking up. That evening, I met Olivia at our favorite cafe downtown. It was raining again, the kind of cold drizzle that made every sound softer, lonelier. She saw the letter before I even said a word. "Oh, Morgan," she whispered, flipping through the pages. "This is insane." He actually had it notarized. I nodded, staring into my untouched coffee. He made it official. Like I'm a stranger to him now. Olivia's jaw tightened. "He's protecting Daniel. You told me your brother's been in trouble with money, right?" "Yeah," I said. "He bought that new house in Burlington. $500,000. But I didn't think." My voice trailed off. "You think Dad knows about his debt?" Olivia leaned forward. "Maybe he does. Or maybe Daniel convinced him that you were the problem. Either way, it's manipulation, Morgan." Her words sank deep. For years, I'd watched Daniel charm people. Teachers, clients, girlfriends, even my parents. He had that polished, confident smile that made people want to believe him. I used to envy it. Now I feared it. When I got home that night, I placed Dad's letter next to the email printout, 2 pieces of paper that carried more weight than a lifetime of memories. Something inside me hardened. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. I opened my laptop and began searching for the one person I thought might help. Henry Wells, my father's former law partner and oldest friend. He'd been like an uncle to me growing up. After my father retired, Henry stayed in practice, handling small cases from a quiet suburban office. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. I found his number and called. Henry Wells speaking. "Henry, it's Morgan Reed." There was a pause. Then his tone softened. "Morgan, it's been years. How are you, kiddo?" "I've been better," I said quietly. "Henry, I just got a letter from my dad. He's cut me out of his will. I don't understand why." Another silence. Then a careful, measured reply. "Morgan, maybe we should talk in person. There are things I can't say over the phone." That sentence. Things I can't say over the phone. Hit me like a warning bell. Something about his tone told me this wasn't just about family drama. There was something deeper hidden. "Tomorrow?" I asked. "Tomorrow," he said. "Come by my office at 10. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words from the letter, irreconcilable differences. I replayed every argument I'd ever had with Dad, every moment I'd disappointed him. I wondered if maybe he truly believed I was the problem. Maybe I had been too blunt, too confrontational, too unwilling to play the good daughter role. But even if I had, did I really deserve to be erased? When the first light of morning touched the window, I looked at my reflection. Tired eyes, messy black hair, pale skin that hadn't seen sunlight in days. "Get up," I whispered to myself. "No one else is going to fight for you." At 9:05 a.m., I stood outside Wells and Partners' law office, clutching my coat. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Old brick, ivy crawling up the walls. Inside, Henry's assistant greeted me warmly and led me to his office. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were kind. "Morgan," he said, rising to hug me. "I'm so sorry about all this." "You know about it?" I asked, sitting down. He nodded slowly. "Charles came to me 2 months ago to revise his will. I advised against what he was doing, but he was convinced. And Daniel was with him." "Daniel?" I repeated. "He was there?" Henry sighed. "Yes. He brought documents, numbers, even signatures. But something felt off. I told your father to verify everything himself before filing, but he refused. Said he trusted his son." My heart sank. "You think Daniel forged something?" Henry hesitated. "I think Daniel used your father's trust to secure control of more than just property, Morgan. There's something you need to see." For the first time in days, I felt something that wasn't despair, it was purpose. A flicker of determination beneath the grief. Before Neil had used our father's love to steal what wasn't his, then this wasn't just betrayal. It was corruption. And I wasn't going to be silent about it. Not anymore. I remember how my hands shook when Henry opened the top drawer of his oak desk. The smell of paper and old ink filled the air. The manila folder he pulled out had my father's name stamped across it. C.A. Charles Redis Tite Revisoon. It looked harmless enough, but every secret I'd been sensing for years was sealed inside that folder. Henry sat back, rubbing his temples. I shouldn't be showing you this, he said, but you deserve the truth? I nodded silently, my throat tight. He slid the folder toward me. Look at these, he said, pointing to a stack of printed documents. Your father's property transfer agreements. See the signature at the bottom. I leaned in. The looping, see. In Charles Reed looked strange. Too neat, too deliberate. My father's real signature was messy, rushed, a mark of his impatience. This isn't his handwriting. I whispered. That's what I thought. But your brother insisted it was. I flipped through more pages. Real estate deeds, account transfers, power of attorney authorizations. Each one carefully dated and signed, supposedly by my father, all conveniently transferring control to Daniel. Henry, did you tell Dad about this? I tried, he said, leaning forward. But Daniel was always with him. And every time I brought it up, your father shut me down. He trusted Daniel completely. I felt sick. So he forged Dad's signature, manipulated him, and now I'm the one being cut out. Henry nodded slowly. Your father's health hasn't been the same, has it? I froze. You know about that? He mentioned he'd been confused lately. Forgetful. I urged him to get checked for early cognitive decline. I swallowed hard. So Daniel took advantage of that. The Henry's silence was my answer. When I left Henry's office, the world looked sharper, colder. The October air stung my face as I stepped outside. I stood there for a long time, the folder pressed to my chest like it might steady me. I had always suspected my brother could lie. But forging our father's will while he was ill, that was something darker. Something I wasn't ready to believe until I saw it on paper. I took a cab back home, my thoughts racing. My phone buzzed halfway through the ride. A message from Daniel. Daniel, stop poking around. Dad doesn't need more stress. Daniel, if you keep pushing, you'll regret it. No. Hi. No. How are you? Just threats, clean and controlled like everything he did. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. He knew I'd gone to Henry. That meant someone had told him. Maybe Mom, or maybe Dad himself, still trusting the wrong child. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my dining table surrounded by evidence. Letters, emails, photocopies, each one whispering a truth I didn't want to face. I highlighted signatures, dates, discrepancies. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I called Olivia. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you're okay? She said immediately. I'm not. I whispered. Daniel forged Dad's documents. He's taking everything. I could hear her inhale sharply. Morgan, this is serious. You need to go to the police. I can't, I said. Not yet. I don't have enough proof. Just suspicions and Henry's word, and if Dad refuses to believe me, I'll look like the bitter daughter trying to start a fight over inheritance. Olivia was silent for a moment, then said, So what's your plan? I need to find out why Dad trusts him this blindly. There's something Daniel has over him. Something he's hiding. The next morning, I drove out to Vermont. The roads were slick with rain, and the trees lining the highway were stripped bare, as if even autumn was tired of holding on. When I pulled up to my parents' house, I sat in the car for a full minute, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. The house looked the same. White shutters, the same swing on the porch, the same overgrown garden Dad always said he'd fix next season. But behind those walls was a man who'd written me off as unworthy of his love. When I knocked, it was Mom who answered. Her face softened when she saw me, but worry flickered behind her eyes. Morgan, what are you doing here? I need to talk to Dad, I said, my voice steady. She hesitated. Has resting? He's not been well. Then it's even more important that I see him. After a long pause, she opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she said quietly. Dad was in his study. The same room where he'd once helped me with school projects, where he'd lectured Daniel about responsibility. But now he looked diminished. Thinner, his hair grayer, his eyes unfocused. Dad, I said softly, stepping closer. He looked up, blinking as if trying to place me. Morgan, you shouldn't be here. I needed to see you, I said, holding back tears. Why did you send me that letter? He looked away. You disappointed me. How? I asked, my voice breaking. But telling you the truth. Daniel forged your signature, Dad. He's stealing from you. He frowned, his face tightening. Don't talk about your brother like that. He's been taking care of me. You just caused trouble. My heart cracked at those words. He didn't even see what was happening. Daniel had built a wall of lies so thick my father couldn't see through it. I placed the documents from Henry on his desk. Look at these. Please, look at your signature. He didn't even touch them. Leave, he said quietly, before you ruin what's left of this family. I walked out of that house feeling like a ghost. Alive but unseen. The door closed behind me with the finality of a tomb. As I got into my car, I saw Daniel standing at the window upstairs, smirking. He raised his coffee mug slightly, as if toasting my defeat. That's when I decided. I wasn't going to run anymore. If my father refused to see the truth, I'd find a way to show it to the world. And, this time, I'd make sure Daniel Reed's lies couldn't hide behind family anymore. The drive back from Vermont felt endless. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low and heavy. The kind that made you feel the world itself was grieving. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. I needed space to think. Dad's words kept replaying in my head. You just caused trouble. He had always been the one to tell me to stand up for truth. To question everything. But now, the same man saw me as the enemy. That wasn't just Daniel's manipulation. That was something deeper. Something Dad was afraid of. By the time I reached my apartment, my reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Eyes red, hair tangled, resolve hardening. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat down with the folder Henry had given me. The fluorescent kitchen light buzzed overhead as I reread every page, every signature. Something felt off about the dates. November 15th, December 2nd, January 9th. Before I could the days Dad had supposedly signed over major portions of his estate to Daniel. But I remembered those exact dates vividly. Dad was in the hospital recovering from minor surgery. He couldn't have signed anything in person. I picked up my phone and called Henry. Henry, it's Morgan again. You said you had access to the original witness logs for these signatures, right? I do, he said cautiously. Why? I need copies of every page, especially the notary seals. Something doesn't add up. He hesitated. Morgan, this could cost me my job. I know, I whispered. But if we don't stop Daniel now, my father's entire legacy dies with him. After a long silence, Henry finally said, come by tomorrow morning. I'll get you what I can. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept wandering back to a memory from years ago. Me sitting on Dad's lap, him helping me write my first letter to Santa. Always be honest, Morgan, he'd said. Even when it hurts. I smiled bitterly at the irony. Now I was being punished for that honesty. When I reached Henry's office the next morning, he already had a stack of papers ready. I can't give you these officially, he said, sliding them into a brown envelope. What you'll find in there might change everything. Thank you, I said quietly. He leaned in. Be careful, Morgan. Your brother's influence runs deep. He's been meeting with some powerful people, ones who don't like their names showing up in legal disputes. I nodded. Then I'll have to make them show up anyway. Back home, I laid everything out across my kitchen table again. The witness logs were typed neatly, but something stood out. The notary public's signature. It was the same on every page. The exact same, no variation. No pressure differences. Just copied. A chill ran through me. Whoever notarized these didn't just sign them. They photocopied a fake signature across multiple documents. I searched the notary's name. Evelyn Carter. There were no records of her ever being licensed in the state of Vermont. Got you? I whispered. I called Olivia immediately. Liv, you won't believe this, I said breathlessly. The notary is fake. Daniel's entire stack of transfers could be invalid. Oh my God, Morgan! That's huge! Yeah, I said, my mind already racing. But I need proof it was intentional. If I can find who made these documents, the printer, the forger, I can expose Daniel and whoever helped him. Do you think your dad knew? Olivia asked softly. I paused. No, I said after a moment. And I think Daniel's been keeping him isolated, feeding him lies until he forgot what was real. Later that afternoon, I drove downtown to a small records office. I told the clerk I needed information on property transfer certifications involving my father's estate. She gave me a tired look but disappeared into the back room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thin folder. These are public records, she said, sliding it across the counter. But be careful who you share them with. The name Reed has been popping up a lot lately. I flipped through the folder. Among the dry legal jargon One name appeared again and again. Lawrence and Hart Legal Consultancy, not Henry's firm. Daniel had hired another firm months before our father's letter. It wasn't just a setup. It was premeditated. That evening, I went through Lawrence and Hart's client list online. One name stood out: Dahlia Pierce. She was known in legal circles as a fixer. Someone who specialized in cleaning up messy inheritances, hiding assets, and making inconvenient heirs disappear. I stared at her photo, polished, confident, ruthless. If Daniel had hired her, then this went far beyond a family feud. This was calculated fraud. I messaged Olivia, found the woman behind the forged papers. Dahlia Pierce. She works with Daniel. Olivia, Morgan, please be careful. People like her don't play fair? Neither do I. Not anymore. I decided to go back to Vermont one last time, not to plead, but to investigate. I'd visit Dad's office, look for originals, and trace Dahlia's connection. Before leaving, I glanced at the framed photo on my shelf. The three of us from Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Dad was smiling. Daniel's arm was around my shoulders. I'd believed then that family meant forever. Now I understood. Forever can end with a forged signature and a lie written in ink. As I packed my bag, I whispered to the empty room, "Dad, if you won't believe me, I'll make you see." The storm outside began to roar again, thunder echoing like a warning. But this time, I wasn't afraid of it, because when you lose everything, family, trust, name, what's left is truth. And I was done hiding from it. I sat at my kitchen table with a map of possibilities spread out like a war plan. The folder from Henry, the public records, Dahlia's file, all of it was no longer just proof of a crime. It was my roadmap. If I wanted to take anything back, I had to be methodical. I couldn't rely on emotion. I needed facts, witnesses, and a legal chokehold that wouldn't let Daniel wiggle free. Henry's voice over the phone had been quiet but firm. "We don't rush into this blind, Morgan. We build a case. We preserve evidence. We don't give them an opening to say you're acting from spite." So, I made a list: forensic handwriting analysis, original notary paperwork, bank transfer trails, and anyone who'd seen Daniel handling Dad's affairs while he was unwell. I annotated each item with who could help. Henry for subpoenas, Olivia for the media angle, and Henry's contacts for investigators. First, the handwriting. Henry introduced me to Dr. Sandra Patel, a forensic document examiner who smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She took the photocopies and ran them under magnification, tracing ink pressure, pen lifts, the microscopic quirks that define a signature. When she looked up, her face was unreadable. "There are inconsistencies," she said slowly. "The strokes are too uniform. The pressure doesn't match the other samples I compared. This looks manufactured." Her words felt like sunlight cutting through fog. With her report, the documents could be challenged as forgeries in court. Next, Henry filed emergency motions to freeze transfers related to the Vermont property, and to subpoena the original notary records and printer logs from Lawrence and Hart, and from any vendor Dahlia's firm used. It was a surgical move, one that would force their hands or reveal their lies. But law alone wouldn't be enough. Daniel had friends in high places, and the kind of public image that made people instinctively side with him. I needed the truth to pierce that image. Olivia called it the pressure angle. "People hate being embarrassed more than they hate being guilty," she said. "If we make this public, carefully, it'll force them to respond. And often, people slip when they think the story's about to go viral." Olivia introduced me to Jared, an investigative reporter who owed her a favor. He didn't want speculation. He wanted documents. When I handed him the forensic report and Henry's preliminary findings, his eyes lit up. "This isn't gossip. This is a scandal," he said. "If these notary logs are falsified, people will pay attention." Jared agreed to hold the story for now, long enough for subpoenas to come through and for Henry to get court confirmations that would protect the paper trail. Timing was everything. Exposed too early, and Daniel would bury the records; wait too long, and Dad's assets might disappear. We also needed witnesses. I called a woman named Marianne, a hospice nurse who had cared for Dad briefly last winter. She'd seen Daniel visiting with envelopes and handwritten notes. At first she was wary. Family politics make people guarded. But when she realized I had legal backing and wasn't trying to shame anyone, she agreed to speak. Her testimony about Daniel's frequent, secretive visits and his insistence on handling Dad's mail became another stitch in the net we were weaving. Henry pushed for one more piece: digital forensics. If the documents were manufactured, there might be a trail on someone's laptop. He worked quietly to get a court order allowing for the seizure of files connected to the transfers. It felt audacious, but it was legal. It was careful. It was the kind of thing that made a river of lies start to show its current. I also rehearsed hard conversations. If Henry could force the documents into court, Daniel would try to spin, to charm, to blame. I needed a calm voice, not a scream. Olivia practiced with me, playing the part of the smug brother until I stopped flinching at his arrogance. There was one idea I hated but realized might be necessary: confronting Dahlia directly. She was the architect. Before I could get her to slip, to drop the name of someone who'd signed off, or to reveal a provider who printed the forged seals, we could break the chain. Henry arranged a meeting under the guise of negotiating a settlement. Jared would be nearby to document anything she left exposed. It was a high-wire move, but Dahlia's confidence was her armor, and all armor can be cracked. 2 weeks later, the court moved quicker than I expected. A temporary injunction froze the contested assets. The subpoenas returned records showing the notary stamp had been digitally implanted, and that the files originated from a workstation registered to Lawrence and Hart's contract printer. A machine serviced last by a vendor with links to Dahlia's consultancy. It wasn't yet a conviction. It wasn't even an accusation on the record. But it was proof that someone had manufactured a trail, and that the trail pointed to Daniel's circle. I remember standing on my parents' porch that night with Henry and Olivia, the wind whipping around us, and feeling something shift. The house didn't look smaller anymore. It looked vulnerable. For the first time since the email, I felt like I hadn't been exiled for nothing. I had allies, facts, and a plan that was starting to move. I also felt fear, sharp and honest. The next steps would be louder. Daniel would see the noose tightening and he would fight. People I trusted could be exposed. My father could be humiliated. But the alternative was worse, letting a lie become the final word on my family's legacy. So I steeled myself and told the night, out loud, do whatever it takes, but do it clean. We win with truth. Have you ever planned a confrontation to expose a hidden truth? How did you prepare, emotionally and practically? Share one tactic that helped you stay calm under pressure. The following Thanksgiving felt like a lifetime later. The leaves had fallen, the air crisp and metallic with the smell of rain. But this year, had a house that once felt like a ghost museum of memories was alive again, lit up, filled with the low hum of people who weren't pretending anymore. I had spent months balancing fear and purpose, court hearings, interviews, and enough paperwork to build a fortress. Henry's careful work and Dr. Paddle's forensic report had exposed the core truth. Dad's signature had been forged. Dahlia's consulting firm was now under investigation for professional misconduct, and Daniel's real estate license had been suspended pending inquiry. The letter that once tore us apart had now become the weapon of its undoing. Still, the confrontation had to be done face to face. Words on paper were justice, words in person were closure. Dad had wanted one final Thanksgiving together before the truth came out completely. He looked older, quieter now, his sharpness dulled by regret. He'd read the legal findings himself, seen the comparisons, the emails, the timestamps. He knew. He called us each individually, asking us to come home. Just dinner? He said. No shouting. I want to see my children at the same table. Olivia begged me not to go. You've already won legally, Morgan. Don't give him the chance to twist it emotionally. But I couldn't help it. I needed to face Daniel, not in court, not in headlines, but in that house where it all began. When I walked in, the table was set exactly as Mom used to do it. Gold-rimmed plates, linen napkins folded like swans, and Dad's old whiskey decanter gleaming in the candlelight. But familiarity hit like a sucker punch. Daniel was already there, sleeves rolled up, pouring drinks as if he still ran the show. He turned when he heard me. Morgan, he said evenly, like he was greeting a client, not a sister he'd betrayed. Daniel. There was no hug, no pretense. Just distance wrapped in politeness. Dad motioned for us to sit. His voice trembled slightly. Before we eat, I need to say something. He looked at me first. I believed what I wanted to believe, and I let Daniel handle things I should have done myself. That was my mistake. The rest, what he did, his eyes flicked to Daniel, was his choice. Daniel's jaw tensed. Dad, you don't understand the pressure? The estate? Stop. My voice came out firmer than I intended. You forged his name, Daniel. You transferred property while he was on medication. You fooled a dying man his daughter didn't deserve what she'd built with him. Don't call that pressure. Call it greed. The room went quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Danny leaned back, smirking that old confident smirk. You think you're some hero now? The world doesn't work in black and white. You used the law to get what you wanted. Don't act like your hands are clean. I felt the sting but didn't flinch. I used the truth. You used a printer? Dad's hand shook as he set his glass down. "Nuff. Morgan, your actions brought the truth to light. Daniel, yours nearly destroyed our name. I've already rewritten my will. This house, this table, everything, will go to both of you equally. But Daniel, your share will be held in trust until you rebuild what you've broken." Daniel's face turned red. "You're punishing me?" Dad sighed. "I'm teaching you the one thing I failed to before. Consequences." For a moment, the silence turned heavy enough to crush air. Then Daniel pushed back his chair, standing abruptly. "You'll regret this," he muttered, voice shaking. Not with anger, but humiliation. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the rain without looking back. Mom quietly wiped a tear. She had barely spoken all evening, but when she reached over to touch my hand, it was like all the years of tension had evaporated. "You did what none of us could, Morgan. You told the truth without cruelty." That sentence undid me. For the first time, I felt the weight slide off my shoulders. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd rebuilt its spine. After dinner, Dad lingered with me by the window, watching the rain blur the garden lights. "I wrote that letter to test who cared enough to stay," he said softly. "I didn't realize I was breaking what little we had left. I'm sorry." I nodded, tears catching in my throat. "I stayed, Dad. Even when you thought I hadn't." He smiled sadly. "And that's why you'll always have a home here." For once, it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like truth. Later, as Olivia drove me home, I watched the reflection of the Reed house disappear behind us in the rearview mirror. Its lights dimming, its ghosts finally settling. "Feels over?" Olivia asked. "Almost," I said, turning the envelope over in my lap. Dad's latest letter, unsealed this time, and addressed simply to my daughter who never gave up. Inside was a single line in his handwriting. "A family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your fight. If you had to confront a family member who betrayed your trust, would you do it privately or in front of everyone? How would you find closure? Through justice or forgiveness? Tell me in the comments what you'd choose." A year had passed since that last Thanksgiving. The night everything ended and began again. The storm that once loomed over my family had finally broken, and in its quiet aftermath, I'd learned the most unexpected truth of all: healing doesn't come from winning. It comes from letting go. In the months following the confrontation, the Reed name appeared in legal headlines a few times. Short, factual mentions about an inheritance dispute resolved in mediation. Henry handled the closing with quiet grace, ensuring no one exploited the story for attention. Dahlia's firm lost its license, and she vanished from the industry like a name erased from glass. Daniel sold his city apartment and moved to a smaller place out of state. He didn't call. I didn't chase him. Dad, though, changed the most. He stopped pretending to be the unshakable patriarch and started acting like a man trying to atone. He invited me for coffee instead of formal dinners, asked about my work, listened when I spoke. For the first time in years, our conversations weren't measured or strategic. They were human. Once, while helping him sort old photos, he paused at one of me in my graduation gown. "You were smiling that day?" he said quietly. And I was too busy looking at Daniel. I smiled back, not out of bitterness, but understanding. "We all see what we want to see, Dad. Patrick is learning to look twice." He laughed softly. "You sound like your mother. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Life outside the family had also started to feel lighter. Olivia and I took a spontaneous road trip to Maine. Something we'd promised to do for years but never had time for. We stood by the coast, the wind tearing at our hair, the sea foaming and furious and beautiful. "You did it," she said, throwing a pebble into the surf. "You turn pain into purpose." I shrugged. I just stopped waiting for someone else to fix what they broke. Olivia smiled. "That's exactly what I meant." When we got back, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not from lawyers, not from Dad, from Daniel. The handwriting was familiar but hesitant. "Morgan, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did was wrong. I lost everything I thought mattered, and for the first time I understand why it didn't mean anything. I'm rebuilding, slowly. Maybe one day we can have coffee like normal siblings do. Until then, take care of Dad. He's proud of you, even if he doesn't know how to say it." Daniel, I read it twice. Then a third time. It wasn't enough to erase what he'd done, but it was something, the first real apology between us in our entire lives. I didn't reply. Some things need time to breathe before they can speak again. By spring, Dad's health began to decline again. Nothing sudden, just the quiet inevitability of age. I visited him often, and we talked less about the past and more about what still mattered. Forgiveness, family, and the strange way love can survive even when trust doesn't. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the window, he handed me a small wooden box. Inside was the original Thanksgiving letter, the one that had shattered everything. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. He smiled weakly. "Because you're the only one strong enough to decide what to do with it." That night, I walked to the backyard, where the air smelled like pine and rain. I opened the letter one last time, reading each line slowly, letting the pain of those words settle before setting them free. Then I struck a match and held it to the corner. The paper curled and blackened, the flames soft but determined, like me. As the ashes lifted into the dark, I whispered, "Goodbye." Weeks later, Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep. At the funeral, there were no angry speeches, no tension. Even Daniel came, quieter, humbler, like a man learning to stand again. After the service, he approached me. "You burned it?" I nodded. "Good," he said, eyes glistening. "It never should have existed." We didn't hug, but the silence between us was no longer cold. It was fragile, like a truce made of hope. Months later, life looked different. I'd moved to a smaller apartment closer to the bay, filled with plants and the kind of calm I'd spent years chasing. On weekends, Olivia and I volunteered at a local youth shelter, helping young women rebuild their confidence. A promise I made to myself during the chaos. Some nights, I still dream of that Thanksgiving, the clatter of dishes, the scent of rosemary and smoke, Dad's laughter echoing down the hall. But the memory no longer hurts. It reminds me that even endings can make room for better beginnings. The Reed family will never be what it once was. But maybe that's the point. Families aren't built on perfection. They're built on persistence. On choosing again and again to show up. Now, when Thanksgiving comes around, my table is smaller but full. Friends, laughter, mismatched plates, and stories that end in healing instead of silence. And every year, before dinner, I raise my glass and say quietly to myself, "Here's to the family we build, not the one we inherit." If you had to start over after family betrayal, would you try to rebuild with them or build a new circle entirely? Tell me what forgiveness means to you. Does it come from love or from finally letting go?